Hello, everybody. You are very welcome back to the 2020 UCD Teagasc KT Conference webinar. And this session is on better communication on environmental sustainability. My name is Catherine Keena. I work as Countryside Management Specialist with Teagasc, and I work with the Environment Knowledge Transfer Group. So the issues that we are facing and are trying to address at the moment, the challenges for agriculture and with regard to the environment, include climate change, water quality, biodiversity. We're faced with targets on climate change to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 10 to 15%, deliver carbon sequestration by 10%, reduce ammonia by 5%. And we know that agriculture accounts for 1/3 of Irish national emissions, methane being the big one, 63% of those, also nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, and of course the non-greenhouse gas ammonia, of which 99% comes from agriculture. We have challenges in water quality to achieve good status in all our waters and ensure our pristine waters do not deteriorate according to the Water Framework Directive. And currently only 53% of our rivers are in good or better ecological condition. Our biodiversity, we know that's under pressure. We still see a lot of biodiversity on farms, and farmers see this, but the research and the science is showing us that the specialist species are disappearing while the generalists are still visible and more visible. So we need to increase the area under agriculture managed for biodiversity. So research has shown us the challenges and the measures that we need to take. What we in knowledge transfer are interested in is how to get practice change, how to actually make a difference. And this involves lots of things. So it's fascinating to have all these studies today. I just recently completed a PhD in knowledge transfer myself, on environment, and again, so we're keenly aware, are there differences in knowledge transfer needed for environment as opposed to maybe the knowledge transfer expertise we've had over the years. And one new very innovative topic that's going on in agriculture is also reflected in this session, which is the very innovative European innovation programs funded by the Department of Agriculture, 70 million that was kept aside from the general budget, and we have 23 European innovation projects throughout the country. Two big ones, the Pearl Mussel project and the Hen Harrier. The Burren has also led the way there. And then we've 20 smaller projects, and it's fantastic to see how they have come into the mainstream by two of them being reflected here today in the studies. So without further ado, we shall go into the presentations. We have 9 presentations today covering the topics that we've spoken about, and we shall discuss later. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Our first presentation on this afternoon's session, entitled Better Communication on Environmental Sustainability, is from Aoife Leader, and Aoife's presentation is on environmental sustainability on dairy farms in Ireland, how to better communicate messages at farm level.
The title of this study is Towards Improving Environmental Sustainability on Dairy Farms in Ireland, the Development of an Effective Communication Method for Improved Biodiversity Management Practices. My name is Aoife Leader, and my supervisors are Jim Kinsella and Richie O'Brien. Farmland biodiversity defines the agricultural landscape and plays an integral role in the sustainability of our farms, a role which has become increasingly more recognised as seen in the recently published Farm to Fork Strategy, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 and closer to home in Foodwise 2025 and the Climate Action Plan for Ireland. Although agriculture places pressure on biodiversity, there is an opportunity here for dairy farmers to increase the sustainability of their enterprises through the improvement of biodiversity management practices. I am working with the 11 monitor farmers involved in the UCD Teagasc open source Future Farm programme on a study that aims to develop an effective method of communication that increases the adoption of biodiversity management practices on farms and addresses farmers' attitude towards biodiversity management to contribute to overall dairy farm sustainability. The research objectives of this study are firstly to establish a baseline indication of biodiversity features and management practices on each farm, and to secondly use this to develop a unique farm biodiversity management plan. Thirdly, to support the integration of this biodiversity management plan into the whole farm plan, and to identify methods that are effective in communicating the improvement of biodiversity management practices. To meet the objectives of this study, a participatory action research approach has been taken. There are 4 phases to this study. The first phase of the study involves establishing a baseline indication of the biodiversity management practices and features on each farm and the attitudes of each farmer towards biodiversity and biodiversity management. To do this, each farm was mapped using ArcGIS, and each of the farmers took part in an interview and completed a Teagasc Biodiversity Management Practices Index survey. Stage 2 involved the co-creation of a biodiversity management plan for each farm. This involved individual engagement with the farmers using Zoom as a meeting platform. To complement the co-creation phase, I adapted and developed a biodiversity management planning tool. Phase 3 involves a period of communication activities which aim to encourage and support the implementation of biodiversity management. Phase 1 and 2 are now complete and Phase 3 is ongoing. The fourth and final phase, which involves a measurement of change to evaluate the effectiveness of the communication methods used within the group, will be carried out next year. From the baseline interviews, a broad understanding of biodiversity and its management was identified within the group. The average biodiversity management practices index score for the group was 5 out of 8. From the maps, the average percentage of biodiversity features on the farming platform for the group was 8.5%, and this ranged from 4.4% up to 18.1%. Baseline findings, the baseline maps, and biodiversity management planning tool were used to guide co-creation sessions held over Zoom. During these sessions, farmers were asked to identify biodiversity management targets that fit within the overall farm plan. The actions specified in each plan reflect these targets. The farmers displayed an interest and enthusiasm for improving biodiversity management on their farms, although without clarity on future biodiversity management requirements, the majority of farmers opted for actions that maintain existing features. Communication within the group is ongoing through the use of WhatsApp, while communication of biodiversity management to the wider community is also taking place through discussion groups, radio and podcast interviews, virtual farm walks, and printed newsletters and articles. This study involves the piloting of an intervention on biodiversity management that has potential to provide a framework for the implementation of farm-specific biodiversity management plans and inform advisory services on effective approaches to communicating biodiversity management, contributing to the overall improvement of sustainability on commercial dairy farms.
Thanks, Aoife. Our next presentation is from Donncha Ryan, and Donncha's study looked at identifying knowledge transfer techniques and policy changes that encourage greater uptake of greenhouse gas MAC measures.
My name is Donncha Ryan and I'm part of the Masters Innovation Support Programme 2019 to 2021. My research title is The Barriers to the Adoption of the Teagasc MAC Actions on Mitigating Greenhouse Gas Emissions on Dairy Farms. My supervisors are Jim Kinsler from UCD, Jim Moyles from Teagasc Tullamore, and Paul Smith from ICMSA Limerick. With agriculture accounting for 34% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland and an annual increase of 2.25% over the past 4 years, Teagasc responded by publishing a document in 2018 analysing the marginal abatement cost curves, which highlights mitigation measures to reduce agricultural emissions over the period of 2021 to 2030. In that document, 27 mitigation measures were highlighted and split into 3 marginal abatement cost curves: an agricultural mitigation MAC, a land use mitigation MAC, and an energy mitigation MAC. For the purpose of this study, we focused on agricultural mitigation MAC, and furthermore focused on mitigation measures which would have the biggest impact at reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland, while also being most implementable to dairy farmers across Ireland. Those 4 mitigation measures were dairy EBI, nitrogen use efficiency, this is about reducing nitrogen where possible by improving soil pH and soil indices, low emission soil spreading, and protected urea. The objective of the study is to identify the farmers' understanding and attitudes towards greenhouse gas mitigation measures, to identify their awareness of the 4 selected mitigation measures and their attitudes towards those measures, to identify limitations of adoption of the 4 mitigation measures selected, and produce recommendations to better inform policymakers and extension services so they can effectively encourage adoption of the greenhouse gas mitigation measures to dairy farmers in Ireland.
The methodology used in this study was a national farm survey with a target population of all ISMSA dairy farmers across Ireland. We used Google Forms as an effective way to send out the survey via text message to all the farmers. Once we fully analysed the results from the survey, it will be expanded on in the focus group, which will be primarily made up of dairy farmers with industry leaders, advisors, specialists, people from the department, ISMSA, co-ops and Teagasc to further elaborate on the findings from the survey. When the Google survey was sent out to farmers, it comprised of 25 different questions, which gathered information on the farmers' attitudes towards greenhouse gas mitigation, their willingness to adopt other greenhouse gas mitigation measures in the Agricultural Mitigation MAC, and several questions based off the 4 specific mitigation measures selected in the survey. On the 30th of July, the National Farm Survey was sent out and was concluded on 21st of August, where 559 respondents completed the survey, where 482 were valid responses that were able to be used for analysing. Out of those valid responses, 463 were primary operators of the farm and 19 answered on behalf of the primary operator of the farm, where 97% were male and 3% were female farmers, with an almost 50-50 split of derogation farmers and non-derogation farmers in the survey. In the survey, each region was fairly represented, as can be seen when compared to the 2019 Teagasc National Farm Survey, with the South having a higher percentage of dairy farmers in both my survey and the Teagasc National Farm Survey. The farmer profile seen in my study is slightly above average compared to the Teagasc National Farm Survey, and this could be due to the survey being sent out through a digital form to the smartphone to the farmers. Provisional findings so far show that nearly 70% of dairy farmers agree that agriculture has an important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland. Additionally, dairy farmers in the study show a high percentage of having already adopted different mitigation measures, with the 4 selected mitigation measures seen in the table above having a 60% average of already adopting the mitigation measures. So far, to date, the provisional results show a positive view towards dealing with greenhouse gas emissions among dairy farmers in Ireland, with a willingness to adopt mitigation measures to help reduce the greenhouse gas emission impact on their farm. Hopefully, this trend can be continued with further analysis of the survey results.
I'd like to thank you very much for listening to my presentation today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Donica. Our next presentation is from Kevin Maher. Kevin's study looked at nitrates derogation farmers using their nutrient management plans as a decision-making tool.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for having me here today, and I hope you've enjoyed the presentation so far in today's event. So today I would just like to bring you through some of the key findings I found from my thesis, which was titled An Examination of the Factors that Influence Nitrates Derogation Farmers Using Their Nutrient Management Plans as a Decision-Making Tool Around Fertiliser. So firstly, my location for the duration of my Walsh Fellowship, I was based in Kilkenny in year 1 and then in Enniscorthy in year 2. And my 2 Teagasc mentors were Terry Carroll, who's a beef advisor in Kilkenny, and Martin Doyle, who is a dairy advisor in Enniscorthy. And then finally, Professor Jim Kinsella was my supervisor for my thesis. So firstly, just to bring you through some of the research aims. So the main research aim for this study was to look at what factors influence derogation farmers using their nutrient management plans as a decision-making tool around fertiliser. was also some other research aims to look at in this study to establish if nitrate derogation farmers use a nutrient management plan as a decision-making tool for fertilizer applications, establish if derogation farmers' opinions towards a nutrient management plan, establish how familiar nitrates derogation farmers are of their own nutrient management plans, and then finally to establish if nitrates derogation farmers actually value the advice within the nutrient management plan provides. So just to bring you through the methodology for this study. So the study had a population of 40 nitrates derogation farmers. There was 20 beef farmers from County Kilkenny and 20 dairy farmers from County Wexford. So each of these farmers were self-selecting. So my two Teagasc mentors provided me with a list of their nitrates derogation farmers, and then I rang each of these farmers up to complete a phone survey with them, and then they either agreed to or disagreed to take part. So on average, each of the phone surveys took 10 to 15 minutes, and the questionnaire consisted of questions on nutrient management practices, soil testing, liming programs, attitudes towards the nutrient management plan, and also decision making. So just to highlight a couple of the findings from this study. So I looked at a couple of different areas. So I looked at the farmers' familiarity of nutrient management plans, how useful farmers find their nutrient management plans and their opinions towards a nutrient management plan, reasons why farmers have developed a nutrient management plan, and then finally the effects of age. So the reason age is there is age was identified as a significant factor when it comes to why farmers develop a nutrient management plan. So on the familiarity and knowledge of a nutrient management plan, only 32% of farmers reported that they were either familiar or very familiar with their nutrient management plan. So 2/3 of farmers felt that they were not familiar with their nutrient management plan. Almost all farmers responded that they were aware of the purpose of following a nutrient management plan. And then only 20% said that they actually used their nutrient management plan when making decisions on fertilizer application. And only 5% ranked their nutrient management plan as their #1 influencing factor when making decisions on fertilizer. So all farmers identified soil test recommendation as an influencing factor when making decisions on fertilizer applications, and dairy farmers rated soil samples higher than beef farmers, and beef farmers had a higher weighting on advice from agricultural advisors when making decision making on fertilizer applications. In terms of usefulness of a nutrient management plan and attitudes towards a nutrient management plan, so 3/4 of farmers consider that a nutrient management plan is a useful tool. And you can see here, so in the phone survey, there was a series of statements asked to the farmers, and then they were asked to rate how much they either agree or disagree. So you can see, for example, there, following a nutrient management plan increases productivity. So almost 80% of farmers agreed with this, or following a nutrient management plan produces better quality grass. Again, over 80% of farmers agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. In terms of reasons for developing a nutrient management plan, so the main reason farmers have developed a nutrient management plan is due to policy requirements. However, when we looked at reasons for developing a nutrient management plan versus reasons for taking soil samples, so only 8 farmers identified the #1 reason they developed a nutrient management plan is to actually increase production. However, there was a higher number of farmers when we asked the same question about why they take soil samples. So 55% of the farmers identified the #1 reason that they take soil samples is to increase production. So when we looked at the effects of farmers' age, so there was a significant identified when we looked at age. So 3/4 of farmers under the age of 50 said that they strictly based their fertilizer applications on soil sample recommendations. And when we looked at farmers over the age of 50, only 40% stated that they strictly based their fertilizer applications on soil sample recommendations. Just to conclude, the study found that there was a good understanding by farmers on why it's actually important to follow soil sample recommendations and nutrient management plans when making decisions on fertilizer application. However, there still remains to be a gap between farmers understanding why it's actually important to follow a nutrient management plan and then actually using a nutrient management plan in practice on farm. And then the study revealed that the opinions and attitudes towards nutrient management plans are actually quite positive. So farmers place a higher value on soil sample recommendations compared to nutrient management plans. And then finally, agricultural extension, education and social pressures all have a role to play in increasing the use of soil sampling and nutrient management plans. Thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome any questions or comments during the discussion panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Our next presentation is from Mark Freeman, and Mark's presentation is on developing a model for reducing greenhouse gas emissions on a farm.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark Freeman and I am finishing my Masters in Agricultural Extension and Innovation in UCD. My thesis focused on assessing farmers' attitudes towards climate change and greenhouse gas mitigation and how best to present this data to farmers to maximise adoption. But first, I would like to give a big thank you to my supervisors, Dr. Tomas Russell of UCD and Connor Kelly of Microsoft. Without the two of you, it would have been very difficult to complete this thesis under the difficult circumstances, and I would like to say a big thank you for all the help and support you gave me throughout the summer. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about the study background. Agriculture is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland, and this is set to grow over the next coming decades unless serious change is made. There is growing pressure from legally binding targets, industry commitments and consumer expectations for agriculture in Ireland to become more sustainable. So, the study aim. The aim of this study was to develop an understanding of farmers' awareness of climate change and attitudes towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions on farm, and how best to present this data to farmers to maximise the adoption of greenhouse gas mitigation technologies. After this would then be used to outline how a tool for estimating a farmer's carbon footprint should be designed. This study had three main research objectives, the first of which was to assess the options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions on Irish farms and the implications financially of doing so. This research objective was to be tackled in the literature review. The second research objective of this study was to develop an understanding of farmers' awareness and attitudes towards climate change and how best to present data to farmers to maximise the adoption of greenhouse gas mitigation technologies. After these two research objectives were carried out, the final research objective was to outline how a tool should be developed for estimating a farmer's greenhouse gas emissions on their farm. For this study, 8 semi-structured interviews were carried out. These interviews were carried out with 8 farmers, 4 of which were beef farmers and 4 of which were dairy farmers. These comprised of varying herd sizes and farm sizes to get a true representation of the Irish farming population. These semi-structured interviews were carried out over the phone as it was not possible to meet in person with the ongoing pandemic. A semi-structured interview guide was first developed and was used as the basis for carrying out the interviews. Each interview lasted approximately 20 minutes. This study had a number of key findings, the first of which was a poor level of understanding and awareness among Irish farmers towards climate change and reducing emissions. Most of the farmers interviewed had a very poor knowledge of climate change and how they could reduce emissions on their farms. There was also found to be a serious lack of information as well as misinformation surrounding climate change among the Irish farmers interviewed. This was backed up by the literature review. The key finding of this study was also the need to focus on the win-win mitigation strategies which simultaneously reduce emissions on a farm as well as increasing profitability. This was found to be the most practical way to get farmers to reduce emissions on their farm. 5 key recommendations were made from the results of this study on how to develop a tool for estimating a farm's carbon footprint. The first of these recommendations was to provide the farmer with background information first. This would involve providing the farmer with some simple information so that they can understand what they are dealing with better surrounding climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and make more sense of the tool. The second recommendation was to make the tool as easy to use as possible. This is due to the fact it was found that many farmers have had difficulties in the past using such tools. The third recommendation was the measurements of how to measure a farm's carbon footprint. It is recommended to use a whole farm systems analysis approach for carrying out this task. The fourth recommendation was to provide useful feedback to the farmer. This could involve showing a farmer where they are most emissions intensive and where they have most scope for improvement. Also, you could include information on how farmers can increase profitability by implementing certain mitigation strategies. And the final recommendation was to focus on the win-win mitigation strategies which simultaneously increase profitability while reducing emissions, as this is the most practical way to get farmers to adopt mitigation strategies. Finally, I would like to say a big thank you again to Dr. Tomas Russell of UCD and Connor Kelly of Microsoft for all the help and support they have given me to complete this thesis throughout the summer.
Thanks, Mark. The next presentation is from Aoife Drennan, and Aoife's study looked at dairy farmers' attitudes to reducing methane emissions through changes in the diets of dairy cows.
Good afternoon. My name is Aoife Drennan, and today I'll be presenting my findings on dairy farmers' attitudes to reducing methane emissions through changes in the diets of dairy cows. Mitigation of greenhouse gases is vital in order to sustain production of food for a growing population while lowering the impact of global warming. The main emissions are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane, with agriculture accounting for 33% of Ireland's emissions, with methane accounting for 66% of these emissions. Methane is a short-lived flow gas, with a lifespan of 10 years, but it has a global warming potential 25 times that of carbon dioxide. It is a byproduct of digestion, with 90% from enteric fermentation and the remaining 10% from manure management. As it is a byproduct of digestion, the diet can be targeted by adding certain feed additives such as plant secondary metabolites, lipids or seaweed. As the farmer is the primary decision maker, he must be the target to increase adoption rates of mitigation, targeting their core values, attitudes and beliefs, which are deep-rooted and difficult to change, requiring consistent time and persistence. Farmers have a productivist mindset, as a key driver on farm is production due to high levels of capital needed on farms. The previous attitude held to mitigation is that it will negatively impact the production and that there is uncertainty to the impact as a result of agriculture. Awareness will increase uptake by targeting the whole society rather than just subpopulations for permanent change to occur, as there is greater confidence in that. The previous biggest barrier to implementation of mitigation options is the attitude held and the awareness level. Discussion group meetings are great facilitators of knowledge transfer, as communication and active problem solving can occur. My research had 4 individual objectives, with the overall objective being to determine attitudes of dairy farmers to climate change, and in particular their attitudes to changes in the diets of dairy cows to reduce methane emissions. My research was carried out through phone surveys as a result of COVID-19, incorporating both quantitative and qualitative data. The sample population chosen was dairy farmers in County Kilkenny, who are members of dairy discussion groups, as Kilkenny is a highly commercial area of farming, with discussion groups members having higher level of adoption to new practices than non-members. The groups chosen were the Johnswell, Castlecomer and Greenacres group, as seen here. A pilot study was first carried out in order to ensure no problems arose, with the data then being collected from the 3 groups over a period of 3 weeks. Overall, the farmers had higher farm characteristics compared to the national average, such as herd size, stocking rate and milking yields. However, they also had higher carbon footprint. Productivity and profitability was regarded as the main barrier and motivation to making changes on these farms. Farmers felt the dairy industry had a responsibility to help and contribute to lower emissions from agriculture. However, a smaller amount were concerned about the levels of emissions produced on their farm. However, climate change still was regarded as the biggest threat to the Irish dairy industry. And coupling this, also 71% of farmers had made changes on their farm in the past 3 years to help lower emissions, with changes in slurry spreading and fertiliser spreading being the most common. Reductions to the herd size was negatively regarded, as it was seen to be counterproductive, while farmers were more willing to alter their diet of the herd. Profitability again was the main barrier to these changes. However, for changes to the diet, profit was left as a barrier, with 20% stating that they could see no barriers changing the diet as a means of mitigation. Research was the main desired change to help farmers implement mitigation strategies on the farm. The main source of information was discussion groups, highlighting their importance in knowledge transfer. Interestingly, there was no associations between influential factor towards climate change with age or carbon footprint, and similarly, no association between age and carbon footprint on the farm. As the research was carried out over the phone, any quotes of interest could be recorded, some of which are included here. Some that I found important were, research is all well and good, however research alone isn't going to communicate the message down to the farmer. And also, the information is there, but what is correct? Overall, farmers were willing to contribute to help lowering emissions, however, and they were interested in the topic. It was evident that changes were occurring to these farmers, as it was highlighted through the difficult weather farmers had to overcome in the past 3 years alone. Changes in the diet was regarded as a win-win scenario, as there could be benefit to both production and lowering emissions. However, farmers did desire greater research to be carried out on farms similar to their own before implementing new practices. The research highlighted the importance of discussion groups as a means of increasing adoption rates of new practices, as knowledge transfer could be delivered directly to the farmer. Farmer adoption of new practices is a key step in implementing mitigation options to lower our emissions. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Aoife. The next presentation is from Martin Ryan, and Martin looks at barriers to adoption of mitigation measures on Irish dairy farms.
Hello, so my name is Martin Ryan and my thesis was on the barriers to adoption of mitigation measures on dairy farms in Ireland. So, some background and rationale for my project. Agriculture accounts for the largest amount of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions. This is a considerable amount of 33%. Ireland has agreed to reduce its emissions by 30% by 2030, and this will include a 10 to 15% reduction from the agri-food sector. Agriculture emissions are comprised mainly of methane and nitrous oxide. There are many methods in which farmers can play their part in reducing emissions. These include protected urea and low emission soil spreading, which this thesis will focus on. Other methods include having a longer grazing season, improved nitrogen efficiency, improved energy efficiency, including clover when reseeding, and having an increased EBI within the herd, so cows stay longer in the herd, which means less need for replacements. So there are many methods for farmers that can use. So this thesis had three main objectives. The first objective was to evaluate the barriers to adoption of emissions reductions measures by Irish farmers. The second objective was to assess the level of knowledge of farmers with the impact dairying has on emissions. And the last one was to investigate if farmers with a good carbon footprint score are more likely to use the mitigation measures on their farms. So, methodology and approach. A quantitative method was used for the approach for this thesis. There were 60 farmers selected. These were all suppliers of Dairy Gold Co-op, which is based in Mitchelstown, County Cork. Farmers based on their carbon footprint score were subdivided into three groups. These included the best, the middle and the worst. All these farmers were then contacted through a phone call and completed a questionnaire. The questionnaire consisted of 20 questions, and each survey lasted for about an average 10 to 15 minutes. All data was then uploaded onto SurveyMonkey, and then all this analysis was then done with SPSS, the Social Package for Social Science. So, some of the key findings of my paper. The main barriers to mitigation measures were the lack of information and the cost involved. These accounted for almost 70% of all results. So, low emission soil spreading. Farmers felt it was a big investment required, and some may not see the return in their investment. For farmers to spread with low emission soil spreading, they would have to buy a tanker with a low emission soil spreading equipment. So this cost 10,000 plus the VAT. This is a massive investment, and some farmers felt that it was over expensive. Others said that they would have to get a contractor in to spread it, and this is also an extra cost. And some of them have wanted to avoid the cost. Protected urea, and of course this is a new product on the market, so farmers are very uncertain about the product. Some farmers said that they do not spread urea during the summer months, as it is very dry, even though the research says that protected urea can be spread in dry months. Others noted that it wasn't having the same response as normal urea and can, so they decided not to use it. So mainly the two reasons, it was mainly down the lack of information and the cost involved in it. So some of the other key findings from this paper. Farmers' knowledge was very average, with regards to the impact dairying has on greenhouse gas emissions. All farmers were asked to rank on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being very much so and 5 being not at all, how much of an impact dairying has on greenhouse gas emissions. The average score farms put on was 3. So very little farmers said that dairying has a big impact on greenhouse gas emissions. There is a massive difference in the uses and mitigation measures with the 3 groups of farmers. The best and middle groups of farmers all were part of discussion groups and were using less than protected urea. When farmers are part of discussion groups, they are obviously hearing more about products, the benefits of them, and when to use them and how to use them. The lower group of farmers, usage was very low with low emission soybean and protected urea. The majority of these farmers were not part of discussion groups and had no intention of joining so their information was, they weren't getting any information about the mitigation measures. So a lack of information was a big barrier to them as they didn't know when to use it. So methods to improve mitigation measures on farms. So more information for the farmers on the measures. More information needs to be made available in the right way for farmers. So about the benefits of the mitigation measures. How farmers can actually implement them on their farm. Not on other farms, but on their farms. Farm walks and open nights are an excellent way of improving mitigation measures on farms, but this has all come to a standstill now because of COVID-19. So people need to be thinking outside the box on how to get the correct messages to farmers. Webinars are an excellent way of getting information to farmers, but this also has a limitation. Not all farmers may have access to good broadband or even a laptop for the older generation of farmers. But it is an excellent incentive for the younger generation, as it is a very informative about getting the correct ideas and messages out there. An excellent method which a survey, which all the farmers in the survey said they would encourage them to use more of the mitigation measures as an environmentally friendly milk bonus. This could be used when farmers actually use the mitigation measures as mentioned previously on farms, that they would get a natural, maybe a small increase for the milk produced. I think this would be an excellent way of improving mitigation measures on farms. Thanks very much for my presentation, and I'd also like to thank my supervisor Tomas Russell, and I'd also like to thank Ciara Donovan from Dairygold, who provided me with all the contact details of the farmers, and also the farmers who participated in the survey. Thanks very much for making this an enjoyable thesis. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Martin. The next presentation is from Neelis Noonan. Neelis looked at the attitudes of dairy farmers to small-scale forestry plantations in a case study in County Wexford.
Good afternoon. The title of my thesis is Establishing Attitudes to Small-Scale Indigenous Forestry Plantations Among Dairy Discussion Group Farmers in South Wexford. So the context or background to this is that greenhouse gas emissions from Irish agriculture are a whopping 34% compared to the EU average of only 10%. So the dairy sector is seen as the main contributor to the problem, given all the expansion in the last 5 or 6 years or even longer. So my proposal is that could small-scale forestry, approximately a hectare, be a quick fix solution, or something that could have a massive impact within a very short time? Now, there is plenty of government support for this, and in particular the Green Party, who have made this a main key plank of their government strategy, and are the main instigators behind this proposal of 1 hectare of small-scale forestry for every farm in the country. What does the literature say about it? In short, it says that many farmers feel powerless in the face of the massive problem that is climate change mitigation, and that we need to inspire a sense of confidence among them. And we also have to guard against a few things, in particular techno-optimism, or the belief that human ingenuity will find a way and this is dangerous and far more prevalent than we might think. In short, we need to engage dairy farmers and create a forestry culture and embed it in their local communities. Ourselves as agriculture advisors can have huge influence on and much more than we can imagine, and we're in a prime position to influence. In brief, the methodology I used was to use my 3 discussion groups as focus groups, and also involved 2 key informers in the form of forestry specialists, and put 4 key questions to them, and we debated and discussed it. All interviews and meetings were completed virtually by link call in response to the COVID-19 restrictions. And the main method of analysis then was using Excel and very simply breaking down the data and responses to identify the emerging themes. The results then, almost all the farmers would undertake small-scale forestry on their farms in the next 3 years. This is a very, very positive development. All respondents, key informants, saw many environmental and social gains. However, no one saw any financial benefit, which is probably no surprise. Many barriers are identified, especially fencing and policy issues. So in summary, everyone agreed that financial incentives, skills development and education were needed. To conclude then, I believe this represents a clear win-win opportunity if properly supported by everybody. Definitely policy changes are needed to make it a success, including fast tracking and covering fencing costs and carbon credit, etc. given. We must appeal to the emotional side of farmers and use whatever imagery and visual communication we can to achieve this. Another serious problem is short-termism views among dairy farmers needs to be addressed. And because it's such a capital-intensive business, the returns have to come quickly. And this is to the detriment of long-term environmental planning. So to conclude then, my recommendations are that farmer concerns were recognised and plans put in place to take their views on board, especially in the area of carbon credit. That the most up-to-date technology be used, for example, remote sensing to identify the optimum areas for planting, that the substantial cost of fencing be adequately funded, that policy and regulations need to be relaxed, and finally and crucially that there would be a focus on changing the mindsets of dairy farmers to take the longer-term view on climate change mitigation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neelis. The next presentation is from Owen Lynch, and Owen looks at the capacity for commonage groups in the Wicklow Sustainable Uplands Agri-Environmental Scheme, SUAS.
Welcome everyone. My name is Owen Lynch and today I'll be presenting my research, which is capacity building for commonage groups within the Wicklow SUAS. I'd like to take this opportunity initially to thank my supervisors, Dr. Helen Sheridan, Dr. Catherine Keena, Dr. Monica Gorman, and Declan Byrne of the SUAS project for all their help and input on the research thus far. So background and rationale to the research. Historic ag policy is focused on food production, and whilst this has addressed food security, it has led to a depletion of natural resources and biodiversity, a trend which has broadly continued to date despite the McSherry reforms of the early 90s and agri-environment policy which has followed up after that. Between 1990 and 2019, the population of Ireland has increased by approximately 1.4 million people, leading to further increased demand for natural resources such as clean water, clean air, energy sources, as well as recreational resources for which the Wicklow Mountains are well known. Adding to this is the threat of climate change. If we take, for example, Ireland's budget for flood remediation, this has increased from approximately €100 million in 2016 to €1 billion in 2018. And finally, in mountainous areas across Europe, the decline in upland farm viability and profitability is leading to abandonment, predominantly of these high nature value areas, and is expected to reach a level between 3 and 8% of total land mass. SUAS either addresses or relates to all of these issues. So taken from the SUAS website, the project is designed to get farmers back grazing and managing the Wicklow Dublin uplands in a sustainable manner which will improve habitat quality, biodiversity value and agricultural productivity, thus addressing all the aforementioned issues, or at least some. So what is SUAS? SUAS is a European innovation partnership. It is a farmer-led approach in the Wicklow Mountains. Why is it special? SUAS uses commonages on the predominance, which is land that is farmed by multiple persons or bodies. This is important as it means in order to make any kind of environmental gain, everyone must be working together, which is why the SUAS project makes aid commonage groups a requirement in order to aid this. So why commonages? Commonages account for 428,000 hectares in Ireland and are farmed between 11,000 and 15,000 farm businesses and are predominantly upland areas of high nature value. As SUAS sets some precedents for how future schemes for uplands may function, it is important that we learn from the scheme. Have the commonage groups been successful and useful? If so, how so and why so? Have upland farmers collectively sufficient access to relevant information if this becomes nationwide? And how should future information be presented to them? For the research, I've used two approaches or methods. One is observational research and the other is surveys. So under the observational research, I attended two national conferences, one localized information event, one SUAS ecological consultation, one SUAS group meeting, with the overall goal to observe farmer interaction and engagement and to ask farmers' opinions on the events. Under the surveys, I carried out two separate surveys, one which was SUAS specific, one which was for non-SUAS upland farmers, with the goal to address the success, shortcomings and importance of the commonage groups and to establish upland farmers' access and source preferences for information. Thus far, the key findings are as follows. Larger events are better for general sector-specific information, such as national conferences for sheep. And on-site consultations with the ecologists are much better for farmers to see areas for improvement and to brainstorm ideas to lead to a high level of engagement in a two-way exchange. Some of the quotes I've received thus far from either attending the events or from the surveys are as follows. I, like many other upland farmers, feel Teagasc has neglected the hill farmer. Teagasc has work to do in this area. There is research that is required and they need to be working on this area. It was great. I think it's the first time I could see where the farming in the uplands will be going in an understandable way. This is a quote that was taken about one of the national conferences carried out in Ballybofey, which specifically addressed all the various EIPs, or at least 5 of them, which given the farmers an idea of where things were going. And in relation to the commonage groups have been good as they have shown that with the right framework, commonage users who don't necessarily like each other can still work together to a common end. Potential implications of the findings. Number one, this research provides a focus on upland farming, which has been largely forgotten. This in itself can allow this to be rectified by further study and research. Allow new information to be directed through correct mediums and channels by asking farmers how they prefer to receive information or how they go about seeking information. It gives policymakers an idea of how future schemes could be constructed, and it gives recognition of the value in the climate change and biodiversity challenge for which the uplands can contribute. I'd like to thank you all for attending this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Owen. Our last presentation in this session this afternoon is from Luke Clogher, and Luke's presentation is on the Rathcrohan EIP, looking at farming in an archaeological landscape.
Good afternoon. My name is Luke Clogher, and the title of my thesis is an investigation into farmers' engagement with the European Innovation Partnership, a case study of the Farming Rathcrohan Project European Innovation Partnership in County Roscommon. So just to give a brief background of the study, the EIP Agri approach to rural development focuses on localised challenges while enhancing agricultural sustainability. It utilises an interactive multi-actor approach which integrates various knowledge sources in the form of an operational group, which consists of stakeholders such as farmers, advisors, researchers and local groups. The Farming Rathcrohan Project EIP aims to improve the socio-economic circumstances of the farming community while also addressing the need to preserve and create awareness of the historically significant archaeological landscape that exists there. It has 3 main elements that concern archaeology preservation, sustainable farming and agritourism development. Although farmers are essential to the success of this EIP, little is actually understood about their perspective. The objective of the study was to gain a greater understanding of this EIP's farmer participants regarding their characteristics, knowledge, attitudes, influences and needs. This research study followed a case study design. Out of the 40 farmers contacted, 39 participated. Quantitative and qualitative data was collected via a questionnaire while at the same time an informal interview was conducted. All was carried out over the phone. It was found that participants' characteristics were similar to that of farmers in the west of Ireland. Family tradition was determined as participants' main reason for farming. Interestingly, participants' exposure to information in their youth resulted in their most effective learning about Rathcroghan. There was a strong sense of pride and respect for Rathcroghan's heritage. However, this was accompanied with frustration associated with the restrictions and bureaucracy. The role of the agricultural advisor was significant. They were determined to be the participants' most popular first contact when seeking farming or legislative information about Rathcroghan. They were also the strongest influence on farm decision making. Regarding the EIP, 95% of participants portrayed a positive attitude towards it. They believed that it will provide a platform for opportunities to be further developed. Nonetheless, due to past experiences with agri-environmental schemes, policymakers and regulatory authorities, there was a slight apprehension that the EIP may not function as advertised, and that it may just revert to a traditional top-down approach. It was clear that participants were aware that their role would be a different one compared to previous agri-environmental schemes. This resulted in an air of confidence that participants could get their voices across and concerns heard by policymakers. It was evident that the priority among participants was to ensure that farming and Rathcroghan preservation are a prerequisite to tourism development in the area. Although the financial incentive was viewed as necessary, it was ultimately seen as a short-sighted strategy. The focus, in their view, should be on utilising the assets available to develop a sustainable livelihood option for the younger generations to help keep them in the area. Otherwise, there's a fear there could be a lack of successors in the future, who essentially are custodians of the Rathcroghan landscape. To conclude, farming in Rathcroghan is strongly associated with pride and emotional attachment and family tradition. Compared to the traditional knowledge transfer approach of a predetermined solution, the multi-actor knowledge exchange nature of this EIP really appealed to participants. It's essential that farmer participants are integrated appropriately into the operational group, especially since they are the limiting factor in the EIP success, as they are directly involved in the farming, archaeological preservation and agri-tourism element of this EIP. It's clear that opportunities do exist for agricultural extension providers like Teagasc to use their resources and engage in farmer-led research and joint programme initiatives to support local farming projects such as EIP Agris. Finally, there is also a strong demand for agricultural advisors to be a go-to outlet, utilising their skills as innovation brokers, facilitators and knowledge mediators, connecting members within an operational group to help achieve its objectives. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you very much all for very, very interesting and clear presentations. Can I ask you all briefly, considering all your effort into this topic, if you were to teach me one thing that we in KT need to know about how to address environmental issues in general, what would be the one thing that would come to mind? So I'll just start across the top of my screen there with Aoife Leader. Sorry, with two Aoifes, Aoife Leader.
I suppose, Catherine, communication is really key in all of this at both an individual level and to the broader community of farmers. Positive communication on what these farmers already have on their farms, I suppose, is a big thing coming from my study, highlighting that they have areas on their farms or that they already have practices in place on farm, that they are doing good, and supporting them then in pushing that on and bringing themselves up even further in sustainability.
Very good. So Aoife, communication there really strong. Donncha, one thing you would come up with?
I suppose very similar to Aoife, she made a very good point of showing a kind of a positive view towards farmers, because with my study anyway, the farmers are willing to help reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and they, with recent kind of publications in media saying how social pressures are kind of putting a bad spin on farmer, it can discourage farmers quite a lot. But if we can help support them in a positive way and figure out what they're adopting of mitigation measures and if they're doing it correctly, to help inform them in the best way possible.
Okay, so I take from you positivity, you know, not giving out or whatever, but positivity will get us further. That's great, Donncha. Aoife Drennan.
Yeah, I suppose my study was a bit different in the terms that I only dealt with discussion group members, which already have higher levels of mitigation and communication, so they're already actively communicating. But my findings showed that these farmers are actively wanting better research carried out, and then this research to be communicated out across to them. So like they are already engaging and communicating, but they do want just more research carried out, and research carried out on farms that are similar to their own, and they can be implemented easily by them.
So they're asking the hard questions of us as advisors. Yeah, no, that's really good. So they want targeted answers, possibly. Is that it, Aoife? Yeah. Okay. So targeted. I picked that up from your presentation that you said farms like theirs. You know, they don't want us talking about the general. Yeah, no, that's really useful, Aoife. Yeah. Luke.
Yeah, Catherine, I suppose in my case it was the nature of an EIP. It sort of focuses on knowledge exchange rather than knowledge transfer of a preconceived solution.
Okay.
So I suppose it's about how to integrate farmers in the process.
And would you see that similar for normal KT, Luke?
Well, absolutely. Like I think if you look at even the ASSET program that goes on, and I think Owen mentioned it there, like you have one-on-one advisors coming out and talking, and when there's engagement there between the farmers, who essentially are the custodians, and it's their own land, you know, and it's they're the ones that are going to be looking after it. So for them to give them a stronger position,
okay,
I think
so that's
definitely
really,
will.
So turn the KT into to KE, which is really, that's
I just
really
think it's
good,
a different
Luke.
approach that could be utilised.
Yeah, excellent. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I think for me, we really need to consider how information within the nutrient management plans are actually disseminated to farmers. Like from the study, it's clear that farmers' opinions and attitudes towards the nutrient management plan is actually quite positive. And even nearly all farmers, when they were asked, do you understand why it's important to follow a nutrient management plan, they all came back with yes. So it's just trying to figure out that last step, or that gap with farmers actually knowing why it's important to actually using nutrient management plans at farm level. So
and it's a really hard one. It's a really hard one, Kevin, isn't it? It's like data. We all like getting maybe a test, but what do we do with the results is the question. We're interested in knowledge about whatever fitness or whatever we're doing, but then what do we do about it is the much harder step. Yeah. So you're interested in there in the process of that step. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The really difficult one. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Owen. You're not on. You're on. Yeah. Thanks, Owen. Yeah. Off you go.
Okay. So as I say, like bouncing off what Luke was saying there and engaging them with yourself, like from my own research, I think for KT, as you said, KT is less relevant than KE. I think going forward, it has to be farmer centric. The farmer must always be at the center. Like a lot of the farmers, I can't stress enough how the engagement that there was with the ecologist on the hill. You know, it wasn't well, this is what I think and you are wrong or I'm right, or otherwise it was, what happened here? Did you feed silage here? And then there was a story, and then there was well, we can work on that, and this is some of the ways we can do it, and it was brilliant. I think, working on the approach that the EIPs is working on is kind of the way forward when it comes to this kind of aspect.
Okay, good for all KT, that approach. Yeah. And finally, Martin, and I know a lot of them may have been mentioned by now, so I appreciate that.
I think more tailored messages for farmers in the right way. Some of the farmers I looked at maybe were not as progressive as the other farmers, and most of these farmers weren't using the mitigation measures. So I think more farmers like these need to be concentrated more so down than others, because if we don't get these on board, we're going to lose a lot. Like, they protected urea, most of them weren't using that product, like, you know, and it's new, relatively new in the market, like, so we need more concentration on products like this, like, to get it out to farmers.
Yeah, so very much tailored messages. Yeah, that's really good. I've got everybody, haven't I, there? You keep me right if I'm missing anybody. Luke, I was really interested there that you came across really with the pride and emotional attachment. I mean, that came across so strong, you know, what you were talking about. How can we use that? Because I know, Mark Freeman mentioned to focus on the win-win mitigations. But, you know, we all know they won't always be win-win, you know, so we will have difficult ones. So can we do anything with the pride and emotional attachment that you found?
Well, I suppose one aspect I found was that when authorities came in and sort of told farmers in these situations, it sort of gave them a perceived loss of power, because, you know, this is their land that they're farming, but they're not allowed to do what they want per se. But they're sort of the participants felt that the authorities just painted all farmers with one brush, that they just want to get the digger in and clear out and have lovely monoculture land, but that's not the case. These farmers, you know, they really wanted to look after it. So I think that, again, it's just about integration, and I think you have to get the farmer side of the story and sort of harness the local knowledge, you know, and
use that pride.
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, Aoife, you also mentioned the words interest and enthusiasm and all that side of it. Just following up on Neelis's work there that said the farmers were interested, were happy enough about the 1 acre of forestry. I'm just wondering, would your farmers, when you mentioned about talking about doing options and you actively asked them about doing things, do you think your farmers would have been as positive?
Probably not at the moment. There is definitely an interest and enthusiasm for doing more for biodiversity, but in most cases, my farms, they chose to work with what they had. That was probably the quote that came out of a lot of my co-creation sessions. So working with what we have rather than planting new forestry, like what Neelis is talking about. I suppose on a case-by-case basis, then some would be more interested in doing things like that. One of them has committed to it, but it's on the plan. I suppose with the uncertainty of what's coming down the line in terms of incentivization and regulations for biodiversity, and since we don't really know exactly what farmers are going to be asked to do, there's definitely kind of a holding off on that for the time being. But it would be great, especially if it was native woodland. It would do great for both climate change and for biodiversity if we were planting more.
Okay, so the interest and enthusiasm is tempered by the business reality that we don't know what we're going to be asked to do in a year or two's time, which is fair enough. But I think a lot of our messages, I know we're very conscious that the first time you talk to a farmer or anybody about doing anything, there is a lag time between, you know, taking that on board and actually doing it. So I think, that doesn't stop us starting the process now, but obviously the regulations and that will hold on.
Catherine, sorry.
Thank you, Jim.
I might just mention that neither Neelis nor Mark Freeman are able to join us. So given that you're just talking about the study that he presented, unfortunately, neither of them are able to join us on the day.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear their studies and relates to some of these as well. Anyway, have you any questions, Jim, or will I keep going? Not at the moment. I suppose, Aoife, you were talking about the productivist, Aoife Drennan, the productivist attitude. I'm wondering, could we switch that? And we all know what you mean. The farmer is bred to, you know, one more acre, one more cow, one more sow, one more acre under the plough. Like, how can we use that for environment, do you think? It's just that you've obviously thought about this productivist attitude. I'm just wondering, have you anything for us on that?
Yeah, I suppose like it has to be taken into consideration that it is their livelihood, and again, as Luke said, like they have a strong attachment to place. But there has to be kind of looking forward, the likes of additives into the diet that can be seen as a win-win, that you're going to lower your impact on the environment and also get more better production out of your animal. I suppose originally it was looking more sustainable per hectare, and now it's looking more sustainable per cow. But yeah, they need to be just, and I suppose, researched further to see what are the best options there. I know Teagasc KT are doing good work there with Vista Milk, looking at EBIs and additives at the same time. So I think the likes of just win-win options are the most plausible, or liked to farmers, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. I'm just wondering, could we turn the productivists into being productivists about the environment? You know, maybe it's a challenge for us, isn't it?
I suppose, like, they are all aware of the issues that are ongoing, and they all do.
And if they want to be the best, I wonder, can we get them to be the best in class with biodiversity, or best in class with whatever? Possibly. Yeah.
Possibly.
I don't know. A question to Kevin there is in your phone survey with farmers, did any of the farmers refuse to be interviewed? And if so, why?
No, actually, in fairness, everyone, the odd time you ring a farmer and they'd be busy and they just said, ring me back, and they give you a time. When you ring them back, then they're all like, the attitude towards this phone survey, and I explained what I was doing, and it was all very positive, and they all welcomed it, and it just went very well with the farmers. So no one refused.
No one. I suppose, Kevin, then they were the local Teagasc advisors client, and then
one of the big helps for me as well, though, is before I contacted them, I working with my two Teagasc advisors as well, Martin and Terry. They actually pre-notified the farmers that I was going to ring them about the study, so it wasn't just completely out of the blue for them either. So they had some idea of why I was ringing. Which was a big help. Yeah.
And while we're with you there, Kevin, are there any changes to the output of the NMP that would be beneficial to farmers to get them to use it better?
Yeah.
Anything simple?
That's an interesting question. So one of the things I actually looked at in the study was soil samples as well. So there was a much more positive kind of attitude towards soil sampling. Farmers found that the soil samples that they were taking them to improve production, compared to when the same question was asked them about nutrient management plans. They said the main reason they developed a nutrient management plan is because of policy requirement. So when you kind of break it down and look at it from that, the big thing that they like about the soil samples is you can get one sheet of a summary of all your soil samples in front of you, and they're able to just read it quite easily, compared to the nutrient management plan could be 10 to 15 pages long, and they just find it too much information in one area and harder to read. So I suppose it's simplifying the process is the way it probably will improve the output.
Because in effect, Kevin, what comes out of the nutrient management plan is the soil sample recommendation, isn't it?
Absolutely. The soil samples provide the foundation of a nutrient plan.
I mean,
so it's a
bit confusing that they see the two as separate, but they obviously do, and I think that's very useful that you pointed that out.
And they definitely do see the two as completely separate.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense, really.
Not quite. No. I think it's the overload of information in one area. I think just kind of they don't seem to like that as much as the soil samples is one page. They can produce it to an advisor when they call out to a farm, or when they call into a Teagasc office, they're able to produce the one page and they're able to see it quite easily. So I think that's probably the big difference.
So simple. Yeah. Aoife, leader, you mentioned co-creation as part of your research method. What does this look like in practice?
So I suppose co-creation is basically working with the farmer, and they give their I suppose input. We put together a biodiversity plan, so it was all about what they wanted on their plan, what fitted in with their overall farm plan and the objectives that they had for that. So trying to fit in biodiversity objectives within the overall plan was a major part of the study, so that adoption would occur. And I suppose that wouldn't have been achievable unless we got the input of the farmers and they told me exactly what they wanted from their plan. So co-creation kind of brought the whole thing together with feeding off of the farmers their information.
Okay, and just while I'm with you there, the idea of a personalised biodiversity management practice index is great. Is it feasible to scale it out? How easy is it to do it? You know, how many farmers can you do with the BMPI? Is it like doing an ecological plan, or how simple is it?
Yeah, I suppose there was there's different aspects to it. Like in my study, I did mapping and I used the BMPI as well. So probably doing a combination of all of those for every farm would be a huge thing to try and scale up. Using the BMPI on its own gives a great indication of the practices on farm, and it's something that can be done on a one-to-one basis with farmers, like I did with my 11 group of 11. But now that I have data collected from those 11, I'm able to go out to discussion groups and use other forms of communication to communicate what's going on these farms, and it gets other farmers thinking about, well, what do I have on my farm? Are these the practices that I have, or what can I change or do for positively?
And how useful is it at discussion groups?
Really useful. You know, it gets a conversation going, and I suppose at the moment that's what we really want. It's a springboard for farmers to bounce off each other. A lot of them have experience with biodiversity through reps or through other legislation. So it's a great way of getting conversation going on the topic. You know, once we have people talking about it, that's the first step, you know.
It gets the conversation going. Luke and Owen, both back to the EIPs there. How much sharing of knowledge is going on between the different EIPs? Now, I know you're not directly involved in the EIPs. You were on the fringe, on the side looking at them. How much sharing of knowledge is going on, and how could that be addressed to get it to other EIPs and out to the broader public?
Well, look,
how could we help?
In my case, that my study took place just in the early stages of it. So really there was very little research to what was done on their side per se. But in terms of what participants wanted, they wanted to see maybe the skill set of an advisor as sort of an independent outlet for both maybe the operational group, the EIP, and for the farmers. So I suppose if you look at the advisor as an independent outlet, like the advisor was the most popular first contact for farmers, and I suppose it can help be an intermediary or as a broker to create networks between farmers and operational groups or different operational groups and EIPs. So I think there definitely is potential.
Now yours is slightly, archaeological landscape is slightly different. Owen's, yours was more mainstream, and there's others involved there. Or there's other EIPs involved. So just the same question to you about the general knowledge about the uplands.
General knowledge of the uplands, I would say that within the actual project itself, there is quite a bit of back and forward between the project manager, the facilitator, and the actual participants. The participants themselves actually would go to the likes of the project manager or their advisor for, say, a specific issue, normally production related, as opposed to ecological or otherwise related. In terms of engaging with other EIPs, they have indicated that they would really, really like to get involved with other EIPs and actually meet up with them and exchange ideas in that respect.
But how do we in KT, how has the messages been transferred throughout the country, in particular with your group that's relevant, or has it, or are you aware of any ways it has been shared?
Throughout the country with the other EIPs, or to the general
or to other hill farmers in this case?
Well, actually, that was actually one of the conferences that I attended up in Ballybouffay, was one where there was other upland farmers involved there, and they presented I think it was 5 of the total EIPs was used, and they were all regarding upland farming, and they really, as I say, one of the quotes that I brought up there in the presentation was actually from one of the farmers, and from his point of view, the way he seen it, it was very good in the respect that he could see, right, going forward, ecosystem services is likely to be our new production. And moving forward, that's probably where it's going to go. And it's something that we need to, as upland farmers, get on board with it. How do we do this? How do we get those production standards, and how do we actually meet those targets?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about KT, and I know the sheep, Teagasc Virtual Sheep Week featured the 5 upland EIPs, which to me was the beginning of the mainstreaming of the message. But I'm just wondering, we need to do more of that, and if there's any, how do we get the message out? I might come back to Owen for another question. How prevalent is the idea that technology will save us, or that someone else will save us? how wide is the feeling that farmers are part of the solution? Anybody like to take that? You know, are they thinking it'll be all okay, somebody will come up with a solution? Martin?
Hello?
Yep.
I don't know. I think more farmers are more engaged with ideas rather than people telling them what to do, like, you know. But some farmers do think that they have a right, that it is up to them to use the mitigation measures. But others are blaming other sectors for it, like, so it's kind of half and half, like, you know. Like,
Yeah.
the more progressive the farmers are, obviously they're going to use it. Like, and the other half then prefer not to use it. So it's half and half, I would say.
Yes. And Kevin, the same with the water quality issue. You know, do they think something will come up and solve it, or do they really think they need to do something?
Yeah, I think there's probably two parts to that question. So, like, farmers have to be seen as part of the solution and not just the problem. I think that's really important. If we don't go down that route, we're kind of banjaxing the word go. But also then technology, like, we can't be solely reliant on technology, but it has to have an important role to play. Like some of the targets you mentioned at the very beginning, like, we look at the farm to fork strategy, like, there's targets coming out there at farm level, the likes of your 20% reduction of chemical fertilizers on farm across the board. Like, through the use of nutrient management plans, that can only make us more efficient on how we're actually using chemical fertilizers on the ground. So technology has to play an important role there. But then again, farmers have to be seen as part of the solution to use these technologies, and their attitudes have to become more positive. And they genuinely are positive. It's not like they're completely negative and they want to go against the environment. So they do have their part to play there as well. So I suppose you probably have, like, your three parts. You have extension, you have education, and then you also the social aspect as well. So through the three of them, it should be manageable going forward, and you would hope to be quite positive going forward.
Okay, and Donncha, maybe coming to you on the greenhouse gas side of it, you know, again, do farmers think somebody else is going to come and solve the problem?
I suppose farmers, they're willing to tackle the environment and try to improve it, but at the same time, they also acknowledge that a lot of focus is being put on them, and they're going to have to, again, as Kevin said, be part of the solution. So moving forward, it's more like if we show that farmers are doing it correctly, and basically kind of a carrot and stick and carrot approach, we kind of reward them. That's saying that if you're adopting these measures, and this is the positivity doing, and then it's being shown to society, especially because of social pressure, that they're doing something to help ease the amount of policies that are being kind of put onto them to reduce all this, cut this, that it's not all negative, that if they do show some positivity towards reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, it's not that they're losing production, they're just making themselves more efficient and running better, kind of thing.
Yeah. Can Aoife comment on which group of farmers, the group of farmers she worked with, are adopting similar measures across all farms?
Yeah, so I suppose hedgerows, whether it's looking at new hedgerows or improving the management around them on all of the 11 farms that's target. Then after that, I suppose focusing on water courses and field margins are the next two main areas that the farms are focusing on. After that, then you're looking at maybe actions around the farmyard, and only a few have looked at that for the time being. But I think it's the areas that are, I suppose, that they're easy to make changes, positive changes, that a lot of the farmers have targeted, and those will be the hedgerows, the water courses and the field margins.
Yes. I suppose, Kevin, just coming back to you on the water, do you think farmers, water and greenhouse gases, you know, are farmers fairly familiar with the water story, if you know, much more than greenhouse gases? I don't know if you touched on that at all with them, but by now have we sorted the water, that at least they know there's an issue there?
Yeah, like one of the questions actually in the survey I put to them was, are you concerned about water quality on your farm? And I think all bar one answered yes. Now, I'm not sure why the one that said no wasn't concerned, but so 39 out of 40 farmers said that they are concerned about water quality on their farm. So they have to be understanding the message at this stage. And then you look at the likes of the ASAP program as well, which is on the ground working with farmers, and that's already starting to build as a success story, and we're starting to see good positive results from that as well. So I would like to think the farmers are now aware of water quality and why it's important to look after water quality on farms.
Okay, yes. Can I come back to you? You've all worked closely with advisors, and I suppose, you know, the environment is new. I won't say it's new to Teagasc, we've been at it, but it hasn't been, maybe they have a lot of other pressures on them with other. So can I just ask your impression of how the advisors view your topics, if you know what I mean, and where they see, are they very interested, or what angle do they think this is? Yeah, what's your experience of the general advisors, even maybe more so than the very one you're closely working with, who is obviously engaged in this process? I'll start with you, Martin.
Hello.
Yep.
Well, we didn't really work with any advisors on our masters, but
yeah.
Yeah, I think they need to take an approach that it'll come across to all the farmers in the right way, I suppose, more than targeting messages. Advisors, then it is new for them, and it's, you know, so they need to target the messages correctly to the farmers, I suppose, more so than anything.
And do you think it's regarded as a mainstream issue? And whatever, I appreciate this year you haven't as much, you know, interaction with the advisors, but in general, you know, from an outside point of view, do you think the Teagasc advisors does everybody think, how mainstream is the environment issue?
It's massive, like, you know, it needs to be rectified, you know. So it's
an appreciation of it is out there. Yeah. Owen, I'll come back to you, Owen Lynch. Any comments on where, you know, upland management, let alone environmental issues, where does that fit into, you know, what we're doing?
And in regards to, like you were saying there about the advisors and their role and how they feel about it, I think any advisors they're spoken to know that it's going to become something that they have to be more engaged with. And they know that their farmers are going to start asking questions. And it was just as a passive question actually to one of the advisors. I asked him, I says, listen, if it comes to it, if a farmer comes to you and says, I need help on how to improve the condition of my heather or to improve the biodiversity, would you have the skill set and the knowledge set to be able to say, well, this is how we're going to go about it? And he couldn't answer me. So I think for the advisors, I think that for them in this discussion, that is what's come forward to them, is this notion that there's a gap in their knowledge, because obviously the demand for ecosystem services and ecosystem service production, there is a gap in how they do that.
Okay. Anybody else who's worked, maybe had more of a chance to work close with advisors? Any comment on that?
Yeah, Catherine, just to say, I think that on the environmental side, I think it's unavoidable. I think policy is going to dictate that anyway. But in terms of my case, the archaeology, just to back up what Owen sort of said, that there is a gap there, and I think there's a real opportunity for the likes of Teagasc to use the resources in terms of farmer-led research in these areas.
Okay, because we're talking about two more specialised areas. We're not talking about general environment. Yeah, that's a really good point from both Owen and Luke. So there's kind of a layer above the greenhouse gas, water and biodiversity on the general farm. And again, it goes back to, I forget whose point was it about the Aoife, I think you mentioned about they want to know about their own farm is really the thing. Aoife, you've been dealing with kind of more mainstream because you're talking about food production. Aoife Drennan, more food production. I just wonder, have you any comment there? You know, and even everything you're talking about is good for farming probably. So where does the environment fit into what you're saying other than a byproduct?
Well, I suppose like it's the overall to look at the diet of the cow to reduce methane.
That's probably all we need to do that one, possibly. we don't need to talk about the environment. You know, we don't need to get the right effect, possibly. It's so specialized, isn't it? The methane and the work you're doing with the feed.
Yeah. Well, like I suppose 90% of it comes from enteric fermentation. So having the diet to target that should be like a good option. And methane is so big in terms of greenhouse gases, like it contributes to 2/3 of the gas. So by reducing your methane, like and by through targeting your diet, should be seen as a win-win option. Like.
Okay, we're coming to a close. I think I'm going to ask Jim to add any final comments. So Jim, please.
Thanks, Catherine. I've been concentrating on the questions coming in, and there's been lots of questions. And just to apologise to those who we didn't get to put them to the panel because there was lots and lots of questions from both my colleagues in UCD and wider afield. We are conscious of time, and we are going to wrap this session up at this stage, and it's the end of day one of our webinar. And thanks, Catherine, for chairing it, and to the panelists on this particular session. Just to kind of recap on the day, we kicked off this morning at 10 o'clock, and we've just noticed that there's been, a great movement of people. We started off this morning with about 180 people engaged in the webinar, and it moved on during the course of the day, and it ebbed and flowed. So we note that people are popping in and popping out, which is great. It gives great flexibility to people, and we hope that you are both enjoying it and getting something from it. We have today had 23 presentations. We've had countless questions answered both live and on text in the background by the co-chairs and others who are supporting the process, and the panelists themselves. So we've had a huge amount of dissemination and interaction. And, I'd just like to, at this stage, thank everyone who's been involved today, and to remind people that we're back on in the morning at 10 o'clock. And our opening session in the morning will be Fostering Innovation in Rural Development, chaired by Dr. Anya Mackin-Walsh. So we really look forward to having you back in the morning and to continue through the day as we've done today. So thanks to everyone for making it both an enjoyable and hopefully productive day. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.